When we speak of sexual energy, we often reduce it to the physiological or the erotic, imprisoning it within the narrow confines of biology or cultural taboo. But in truth, sexual energy is far older than our definitions of it. It is the raw, undifferentiated life force that surges through all living things. Before it manifests as physical desire, it exists as pure potency, the creative urge of the cosmos itself, mirrored within the human soul. In myths across civilizations, this energy appears not as mere lust, but as the divine spark that separates light from darkness, sky from earth, consciousness from chaos. It is Eros in its original form, not merely as the god of romantic love, but as the sacred force of cohesion, the magnetism that draws all fragmented parts toward unity. In the psyche, this energy is not bound to gender or orientation, but to archetypal polarity. The dance between animus and anima, between the masculine and feminine principles that reside within us all. To awaken through sexual energy, one must begin by seeing it symbolically, not literally. It is not the act, nor even the object of desire that holds the key to transformation, but the energy behind the desire. This energy is the same that drives the artist to create, the mystic to seek union with the divine, the thinker to probe the mysteries of existence. It is an urge to transcend separation, to return to an original wholeness we only dimly remember. The body becomes the vessel, yes, but the source of this energy lies in the unconscious, a chthonic wellspring connected to both instinct and spirit. Sexual energy emerges from the deepest layers of the psyche, where language dissolves and symbols speak. It is irrational, ambivalent, and paradoxical. It resists our attempts to control or define it. It can manifest as overwhelming desire, as creative ecstasy, or as destructive compulsion. But beneath its many masks lies the same truth. This energy is alive. It wants expression. And more than that, it wants integration. In this sense, sexual energy is both a gift and a challenge. It forces the ego to confront what it cannot tame. It exposes the illusions of control and the fragility of our conscious ideals. And yet, in this confrontation, the possibility of transformation arises. If one approaches it with reverence, not as a force to be indulged or denied, but as a sacred riddle to be lived, then a door opens to the deeper layers of the self. This is where the symbolic function becomes essential. To see sexual energy only in terms of gratification is to remain trapped in the literal world, disconnected from the inner meaning it carries. But when we allow this energy to speak in dreams, in art, in fantasy, in inner dialogue, we begin to see that it is a language, a cipher, a guide. It points beyond itself to something more primordial, more encompassing. The body may express sexual energy through desire, but the soul expresses it through longing, for union, for transcendence, for the return to something original and whole. This longing is not a flaw in human nature. It is its compass. It is what draws us not only to others, but inward toward what has been forgotten or disowned within ourselves. In this way, sexual energy serves not only as a drive toward another, but as a mirror reflecting the mystery of our own being. The danger lies in ignoring or reducing it. When denied, this energy becomes distorted, repressed into shadow forms that erupt as obsession, shame, addiction, or emotional numbness. When worshipped blindly, it becomes a false god, promising liberation but delivering only deeper entrapment. The path is neither repression nor indulgence, but symbolic engagement, seeing it not as an end in itself, but as a force pointing toward deeper integration. Sexual energy, then, is not merely about sex at all. It is the voice of life itself, calling us toward participation, toward creativity, toward wholeness. It reminds us that we are not merely thinking beings or moral agents, but living symbols of something larger and more mysterious, caught in the eternal movement between matter and spirit, instinct and image. The The known and the unknowable, the repression of sexual energy, is not the quiet denial of a physical urge. It is the burial of an ancient and potent force into the unconscious, where it transforms, festers, and gains autonomy. What is driven underground in the psyche does not die. It returns, disguised, symbolic, often distorted, demanding to be seen not in its original form, but through symptoms, dreams, compulsions, and fragments. And individual believes repression is control, that virtue lies in containment. But the psyche is not so easily fooled. Oh no. The unconscious remembers what consciousness refuses to face. To repress sexual energy is to deny a fundamental aspect of one's vitality. But the psyche, like nature, abhors a vacuum. What is excluded from the light of awareness becomes part of the shadow, the inner other that contains all that the ego finds unacceptable, shameful, or dangerous. And once cast into the shadow, sexual energy is no longer accessible as a life-giving force. It becomes a trickster, a saboteur, a silent manipulator. It emerges as guilt-ridden fantasy, sudden rage, depressive inertia, or a haunting sense of incompleteness that no external success can resolve. The tragedy of repression lies in its subtlety. It is rarely chosen consciously. Instead, it is inherited, absorbed through silent glances, cultural narratives, religious dogmas, and familial shame. From early childhood, messages are encoded into the body and psyche. Desire is dangerous, pleasure is sinful, the body is suspect. So the child internalizes the judgment and learns to split, to fragment the self into what is acceptable and what must be hidden. This psychic splitting creates a disconnection not only from one's own desires, but from one's own sense of aliveness. But what is hidden does not become passive. Repressed sexual energy becomes charged with psychic intensity. It collects archetypal weight, feeding the shadow with images of seduction, danger, and taboo. It may erupt in moments of irrational attraction or compulsive behavior, shocking the ego, which claims ignorance. I don't know what came over me. Yet the truth is that what it came over was always there, simply unacknowledged. It is the old paradox. What we resist persists, but in symbolic and often destructive form. And yet, the appearance of shadow material is not a failure, it is a summons. The eruption of repressed sexual content is not merely a psychological issue to be corrected, but a call toward integration. The psyche wants wholeness, not purity. It wants contact with all its elements, even the dark, messy, and contradictory ones. The surfacing of repressed desire is not the end of morality, but the beginning of authenticity. To meet the shadow is to meet the self in its entirety, not just the image one presents to the world, but the raw material of the soul. This confrontation, however, is profoundly unsettling. It shatters illusions of control and exposes the fragility of the persona, the mask worn to conform, to succeed, to belong. The integration of repressed sexual energy requires courage, not indulgence. It demands a willingness to feel shame without being consumed by it, to acknowledge desire without being possessed by it. This is not a path of hedonism, but of symbolic awareness. One must ask, what is this desire trying to show me? What part of myself have I exiled in the name of being a good? For many, the fear of this energy is rooted in the fear of losing control. But control is the language of the ego. Transformation is the language of the soul. Repression may keep the ego safe, but it also keeps the self incomplete. The psyche is not interested in safety. It is interested in evolution, in wholeness. And sexual energy, especially in its repressed form, holds the key to what has been lost, what has been feared, and what longs to be reclaimed. The return of the repressed is never random. It is meaningful. It is mythic. It is a sign that the unconscious is active, that the denied aspects of the self are stirring beneath the surface. To encounter the shadow of repression is to enter into dialogue with one's own depths, to face the inner stranger who carries both wound and wisdom. True. The task is not to banish this figure, but to understand it, to listen to its language of symbols, sensations, and dreams in every human being. Regardless of gender, there exists a silent duality, an inner polarity of forces, each reflecting archetypal dimensions of the psyche. And these are not merely masculine and feminine in the conventional societal sense, but deeper principles: activity and receptivity, logic and intuition, fire and water, spirit and soul. To awaken through sexual energy is not only to feel more intensely or to relate more passionately, but to enter into a sacred process, the conjunctio, the inner marriage of opposites. This union is not achieved through external relationships alone. The outer encounter with a lover may ignite the fire, may stir what is dormant, but the deeper alchemy takes place within. The figures we fall in love with, obsess over, or feel magnetically drawn to often reflect the inner other, the anima or animus, the unconscious image of the contrasexual self that lives in the depths of the soul. When one projects this image onto another, it can create the illusion of completion. Hook. But projection, though powerful, is only a beginning. The true work is not to remain in the projection, but to reclaim it, to draw that energy back into oneself and engage with it consciously. This is where the symbolic function of sexual energy reveals its transformative potential, emotive potential. Erotic longing, romantic obsession, or deep psychic attraction are not merely signs of emotional need or physical desire. They are messages from the unconscious calling us toward the task of inner union. The longing for the beloved is ultimately a longing for lost parts of the self, for qualities, energies, and potentials that have been disowned, forgotten, or never consciously developed. The beloved becomes a mirror, a symbolic gate through which one glimpses the soul's missing half. The path toward this union is rarely straightforward. It requires the courage to confront inner conflict. The masculine in the psyche may be dominant, disciplined, goal-driven, but cut off from feeling, sensitivity, or surrender. The feminine may be intuitive, nurturing, receptive, but ungrounded, afraid to assert, afraid to act. These energies, when imbalanced or disconnected, create suffering not only in the self, but in relationships, creativity, and inner life. One may feel fragmented, as though pulled between polarities, unable to find harmony. Yet this fragmentation itself is part of the process, for it is only through tension that synthesis is born. The inner marriage is not about erasing difference, but holding opposites until a third thing, a new awareness, can emerge. The sacred union takes place not in perfection, but in the willingness to allow contradiction to exist within. It is a psychological alchemy, a slow burning where opposites, light and dark, male and female, conscious and unconscious, are brought into dialogue. In many ancient myths and mystical traditions, the union of opposites is portrayed as a cosmic event. The sun weds the moon, heaven embraces earth, the king marries the queen. These images are not merely outer stories, they are blueprints of the inner world. When the inner marriage occurs, one is no longer at war with oneself. Desire is no longer split between impulse and shame, between control and chaos. Instead, sexual energy becomes integrated. It flows not as compulsion or fantasy, but as presence, creativity, and deep connection. This integration does not mean the disappearance of conflict. Rather, it marks the birth of an inner center that can contain conflict without being torn apart by it. The inner marriage gives rise to a more whole self, a psyche no longer ruled by one pole at the expense of the other, but capable of living from a deeper, more balanced ground. The opposites do not cancel each other. They complete each other, enriching the field of consciousness with their paradox. To walk this path is to return again and again to the symbols that guide the journey, the sacred union in dream, the dance of sun and moon in myth, the lover's gaze that reveals the self beyond persona. The erotic, in this light, is not merely about touch or union with another, but about awakening the sleeping energies within, about drawing the unseen beloved from the unconscious into the heart of awareness, and holding that presence not as fantasy, but as a living, breathing aspect of the soul's totality. Eros, in its original and archetypal form, is far more than the force of romantic love or physical attraction. It is the great connector, the binding agent of the psyche, the urge that seeks to unite what has been divided. Where Logos separates, categorizes, and defines, Eros gathers, synthesizes, and longs to make whole. It is not merely emotional or sexual, it is a metaphysical current that moves through the soul, often appearing as desire, but pointing toward a deeper truth. In this sense, Eros is a guide, a living symbol of the soul's hunger for unity, and therefore a sacred path to individuation. Individuation, the process by which a person becomes who they truly are, is not a journey of escape from the world or the body. It is a journey through them. Through them. The energies of desire, longing, fantasy, and attraction are not distractions from the path, but steps along it. Each longing that stirs the heart, each attraction that unsettles the psyche, each erotic image that haunts the dream, is a whisper from the unconscious, a call to uncover what has not yet been integrated. Eros, in this way, does not lead outward first, but inward, toward what is missing, exiled, or asleep within. Desire, then, is not only a biological instinct, but a spiritual metaphor. It speaks to the soul's awareness of its own incompleteness. We desire another not simply because of who they are, but because they carry something we have lost. They mirror a fragment of our deeper self, a quality or energy we have yet to embody. The experience of falling in love in this light is a moment of profound recognition. One does not fall in love with a person, but with an archetype, an image, a psychic projection of the inner other, momentarily made visible in flesh. This recognition, however, is often unconscious. We do not see the projection, we see only the person, and we mistake the outer for the inner. Yet if one follows the thread of Eros consciously, if one questions the intensity of desire, explores the fantasies it brings, listens to the dreams it stirs, then desire becomes a map. It points to the unclaimed parts of the psyche, the silenced voice, the unlived fire, the repressed instinct, the forgotten innocence. The person who draws us with such force may be a soul companion, yes, but more importantly, they are a symbol. They carry, however briefly, the lost key to something within. And so the work of Eros is double. It pulls us toward others, yes, but only so that we may be pulled more deeply toward ourselves. It is not narcissism, but a sacred mirroring. The beloved becomes the gate through which the soul passes to discover its own multiplicity. The agony and ecstasy of love, the bliss of union, the wound of separation are not random emotional events. They are stages in the ritual of becoming. The heart breaks open because it must. The shattering of the ego's illusions is necessary for something deeper to emerge. The fire of Eros burns away falseness, exposing both our deepest longing and our deepest fear, the longing to be whole and the fear of what wholeness demands. In the psyche, the prima materia is often our sexual instinct, raw, powerful, and misunderstood. Through reflection, imagination, and conscious containment, this energy begins to refine itself. It ceases to seek only release and begins to seek meaning. Containment in this context does not mean repression. It means holding the energy like one holds a sacred vessel without immediately acting upon it. This creates a psychic crucible, an inner space where the instinctual meets the symbolic, where the lower is invited to ascend. One might feel sexual attraction, but rather than collapsing into it or denying it, one listens. What does this feeling want to express? What is it revealing about my needs, my wounds, my unlived potential? When energy is held in awareness rather than acted out, it becomes luminous and luminous. The body becomes a site not just of pleasure, but of initiation. Art is often born of this containment. So is deep spiritual insight. The mystic, the poet, the dancer, the dreamer, all are vessels of transmuted Eros. Their works are infused with energy that was once raw desire, now lifted into symbol and vision. This is not a denial of the body, but a sanctification of its language. The sexual is not erased, it is expanded, made sacred through consciousness. The path of transmutation requires discipline, but it is not the discipline of denial. It is the discipline of presence, the ability to feel without fleeing, to hold without clinging, to observe without judgment. It asks that one remain awake in the fire, allowing it to burn away what is false and reveal what is hidden beneath the surface of instinct. Desire does not arise from nowhere. It is not merely a response to the external world, to beauty or attraction or chemistry. Desire is a message, encoded and symbolic, emerging from the unconscious, often misunderstood, often feared, but never accidental. When we feel pulled toward someone or something with an intensity that cannot be explained rationally, we are not just responding to physical stimuli. We are being summoned. Something deep within us is reaching out, using the language of Eros to speak in symbols, in sensations, in fire. The unconscious does not speak in logic, it speaks in metaphor. Its grammar is made of dreams, images, synchronicities, symptoms, and compulsions. Sexual desire is one of its most potent languages. It emerges suddenly, sometimes inconveniently, often inexplicably. It may arise in dreams that shock us, in fantasies that disturb us, in longings that do not match our values. But to dismiss these movements as immoral or meaningless is to ignore the inner life that seeks our attention. The unconscious does not whisper without reason. It is attempting to make contact. When sexual desire feels disproportionate or obsessive, it often signals that more is being carried than the literal attraction to another person. The figure of desire, be it in waking life or in dream, acts as a carrier of psychic content, an archetype, a projection of something interior that has not yet been integrated. It may represent an unlived potential, a part of the self that has been repressed or forgotten, or even a stage in the soul's evolution that seeks activation. The heat we feel in such moments is not just libido. It is transformation pressing at the threshold of consciousness. This is why repression fails, not because it is morally wrong, but because it blocks communication. When the unconscious is ignored, it does not go silent. It intensifies. It forces its way through the cracks. The more one pushes the desire down, the more it takes on distorted forms. Dreams that disturb sleep, attractions that disrupt life, impulses that defy explanation. And yet, the invitation is always the same: to turn inward, to listen, to decode, to engage with sexual desire as a symbolic communication from the unconscious requires a shift in attitude. One must stop asking merely, "Oh, what do I want?" and begin asking, "What is this energy trying to show me?" The object of desire may be important, but the subject, the one experiencing the desire, is the true ground of inquiry. What part of myself is being activated by this feeling? Intrigued by this feeling.